Alrighty, part five. As you can tell from the miracle of special effects video, my hair is shorter and the lights have changed. Time has passed. But you might have thought I lost my place, but you would be wrong. Part five, Clinton crime family. Finishing our discussion about Vince Foster. The liberals at the time complained about any conspiracy about the murder of Vince Foster because he had no reason to be murdered and every reason to kill himself, or they came up with reasons. Said he had depression, he was whatever, bunch of reasons. The people who believe something fishy went on believed that he had some beans to spill and was ready to do so. That would have indicated the Clintons. Now, it may be a little harsh to say the Clintons had Vince Foster killed. And at the time, it was downright preposterous. After all, this was just the first full year of the Clinton administration, and hardly anyone understood them or knew them at the time, except maybe those who knew them as far back as Arkansas. But today, it's not quite as far-fetched as you might think. Why do I say that? I say that because now we can look back in history, and we can look back and see the mysterious nature of people who seem to die around the Clintons. People who are close to them, people who testify against them, people who have the goods on them, people who might testify against them or be made to testify against them, whatever the deal might be. There's a interesting and kind of tragic association with people who in perfectly good health seem to drop off the face of the earth by accident, undiscovered health reasons, murder, what have you. And I don't believe in coincidences, as you know, and there's just far too many of these incidents. I mean, lots, like over 100 incidences of people around the Clintons dying who have a tie to them. And it's far too many to just dismiss. And now with that in mind, looking back, saying, well, Vince Foster may have been the first, or theoretically the first, of many. There's no proof. Again, I can't commit slander and just say right out the Clintons had him killed. But there's a lot of evidence that would make one suspect that we're not being told the whole truth there. What a shock. Something about the Clintons we're not being told the whole truth about. Moving on. The next gate is Travelgate, the third in a series. You can write a book just about the gates. Travelgate is an interesting little non-crime, perhaps, more of a episode in cynicism, if nothing else. Historically, there's a lot of people who work in Washington and the federal government, other governments too, but federal government specific to this discussion, where they are not necessarily in political positions. They're not brought in by the current president. They're not in a position of influence or power, politically speaking. They're just functionaries of the administrative government that we have created over the last 100 years. Far too big and deep, and people who do things in basement offices and in back rooms that American people don't even have a clue about. Most of these people tend to be apolitical. I mean, they might have a political bias, but it doesn't affect their work or has nothing to do with their work. They're all over the federal government. and they're even in the White House. For instance, the staff that runs the White House. But in case of Travelgate, the travel office in the White House. The function of travel office is multitudinous. It's they handle the coming and going of the First Lady and the President on guests that come in, on trips they take out, on who's in the Lincoln bedroom, all sorts of things. They plan hotels and travel and plane trips and vacations and getaways and people coming in and foreign dignitaries, the whole thing. I mean, they're a busy, busy office, and they don't have time for politics, theoretically. And from time to time, these people are holdovers from previous administrations. You know, if they got a great cook, and the guy, Bush says, hey, he's a great cook, you might want to keep him, he'd probably keep him. These guys are there for year after year after year, and they've seen presidents come and presidents go. And people in the travel office have traditionally been the same thing. But we're talking about the Clintons, and tradition didn't have much sway with them. They kicked tradition to the curb on many occasions. Specifically, in this case, 7 of the top people in the travel office at the White House were summarily dismissed without cause so that Hillary could bring in her buddies and friends from Arkansas, I assume, in a scandal that's not necessarily a crime, but a scandal that is worthy of a lot of note because it is illustrative of the kind of cynicism and lack of really care that they have for people they don't know or people that they think they can step on. And they were treated quite rudely, quite harshly when they were told to leave. They were given no notice whatsoever. And it was a big stinking to-do that just shines a light on who we're dealing with here. Not necessarily criminal. Same year, 1993, we're still on that little year. Wild Bill had another episode with his libido. A very longtime friend of both he and Hillary, going back to Arkansas. Had an occasion during some event to be in their midst. And Bill got this particular woman alone. She trusted him because he was a family friend, as it were, or a friend. And he sexually harassed her. He groped her and did some other things. The woman I'm talking about is Kathleen Willey. And it didn't end like with Paula Jones. It didn't just end there. But different than Paula Jones, where he was somewhat of a friendly flirt after he exposed himself. This time, after he had the unmitigated gall to harass a friend who was married to a friend of his as well, and told, stop. They were worried about this one. They knew who they were dealing with this time. They didn't know who Paula Jones was, some trailer park trash they thought that they could bully and get out from under her. As some of Clinton's colleagues said, that you can drag a dollar bill through a trailer park and people like Paula Jones would go clamoring after it. These are the people I was talking about who, carry the liberals' water. Don't matter how bad the accusation is or what these people are capable of, if they're doing their bidding and they're following their agenda that they like, all's forgiven. But Kathleen Willey was a different creature. She was smart. She was someone they knew, and they were threatened by her and afraid she would spill the beans. This is one of those bimbo eruptions, you might say. And so, I'm sure this had nothing to do with Betsy Wright, but according to a book that Kathleen Willey wrote called, what was it called? I forget. I have it on the bookshelf over here somewhere. Anyway, she says that she can't prove anything, but on multiple occasions she was watched, she was followed, people were at her house in the tree line behind her house, people were in her house, she was threatened on the phone by anonymous people, and she believes very strongly that these were not so subtle warnings coming down from on high, people in the Clinton administration, that were threatening her kind of at an angular, obscure, obtuse way, not to come forward. But come forward she did. And to this day, like all the women who come forward and are mad that they didn't get their justice, her story has never changed. She has suffered greatly, and you can tell in her demeanor from this experience. She had to write this book to get it out. Probably cathartic for her, but again, completely, utterly, and totally believable. As Hillary said, all women who are sexually harassed or raped have the right to be believed. So, Hillary, I'm taking your advice and I'm believing her. She's never had her day in court, by the way. And also in 1993, to cap off the year quite nicely with a little bow tie, first year in office, good old Bill Clinton got his Attorney General, Janet Reno, involved in something that became a mess. Now, again, are we talking about criminal behavior? Not so much, maybe. But this was such a huge scandal, such a big news story, that you just can't keep it off the list and call it benign. Like, oops, I made a mistake, or oops, that was just a little lack of judgment. No. Now, it wasn't he himself. It was his gal, Janet Reno, call her gal, whatever she was. Awkward. That's what she called herself. I'm just an awkward lady. Well, she was awful awkward when she handled the Waco, Texas Branch Davidian debacle in 1993. David Koresh might have been a cult leader, but no one was dying in that little compound a few miles outside of Waco, Texas. They might have been brainwashing children. He might have had 100 concubines. He might have been going against certain civil, laws and whatnot. But he wasn't hurting anybody physically anyway. And it had to be dealt with. It had to be stopped. There's a million ways that could have ended. A million ways that could have been dealt with. What did Janet Reno do? Well, when the FBI, under Janet Reno's direction, took over the case away from the ATF, because he had firearms in the compound and some other things, they basically made a big mess of it. Now, lately the FBI has also been in a lot of mess, and the liberals like to back the FBI up. But look, these guys have made lots of mistakes over the years, and they really look like donkeys lately. And this was, just one more example, maybe the first in line of many, where they didn't come off smelling like a rose. And it wouldn't be the last time either under this administration. They assaulted this compound for many, many days, and they finally had a shootout that resulted in the deaths of 76 people, including 4 FBI agents, I believe. Now, you tell me that couldn't have been handled a little bit better? Okay, yeah, the guy was armed and maybe willing to do something about it. But it seems to me that the way they handled it, I think they had some armored vehicles or tanks or something, I don't know, at the hands of the FBI, they might have been a little over the top. Just saying. But this is what you get when you have a commander-in-chief, a person who has probably never even let the Arkansas National Guard out of their barracks the time he was governor of Arkansas, and knows nothing about it, knows nothing about tactics, knows nothing about any of it. Nor did Janet Reno. Whoever was running the FBI at the time obviously did, but whose direction gave them the go-ahead to do what they did? And then, of course, there was the whole aftermath where they justified and rationalized the whole thing. Just another little blemish, you might call, on the Clinton administration, as far as I'm concerned. Everything starts at the top. You can't blame the president for everything, but who ran the FBI? Department of Justice, Attorney General. And who appointed that Attorney General? Bill Clinton. You know, crap does run uphill sometimes. Gotta take some blame for it, or credit for it, or responsibility for it. Oh, that's right, we're talking about liberals. They don't take responsibility for anything. What was I thinking? During the years of 1995 and 96, another scandal involving Bill Clinton and his libido, the one that ultimately became the biggest scandal of its kind, and a watershed moment, or period, for the Clinton presidency. A young intern who was 22 years old, named Monica Lewinsky, who had a little crushy poo on the president, got herself in front of him as often as possible. And like a dumb newbie with half a brain, Bill Clinton took the bait and she sunk him right to the bottom. He had an affair with this intern who was some 30 years her senior, his senior, for a year or so. But this girl was young, and she was a little bit paranoid to some degree. She was drawn by his power, and that's where the real crime is about, it might have been consensual and they might have been adults, but he had a certain power being who he was and who she was. And that's the complaint that liberals like to give all the time when two consenting adults of different ages or different positions or statuses in their lives, or one has power over another or influence that can influence the other person. Well, she was drawn to this power. It's probably what the crush was, and his charisma, of course. But she was also frightened by it. And she was so frightened that she actually told people about the affair, including someone who worked in the White House, Linda Tripp. And later on, Linda Tripp tripped everybody up by telling what she was told by Monica Lewinsky. In fact, she started to tape her conversations with Monica Lewinsky for purposes of her own, which, might have been somewhat selfish. She seemed to seek the notoriety. But people tried to piss all over Linda Tripp for her salacious nature and her unrequested, unwarranted taping of her conversations, and ignore, of course, what they were talking about. How very convenient. But this was never about Linda Tripp. This isn't necessarily about Monica Lewinsky, who later on regretted all of it and goes on speaking engagements talking about the trouble that young women, professional women, can get in when they're dealing with people who are more powerful. This is about Bill Clinton, who, for all intents and purposes, was getting more and more out of control as time went on. Harder to handle. His affairs, his careful nature is starting to erode. He's not so careful anymore, to the point where he actually had Monica Lewinsky giving him fellatio in the Oval Office. Now, it's enough that he kicked tradition to the curb, but he also had so little respect for the office of the president that he would do something like that. I doubt even President Kennedy did something to demean the office of the presidency, the literal Oval Office of the presidency, to that degree. But that little affair, of course, would go on to become probably the biggest issue between the right and the left regarding Clinton's presidency, maybe in history. And we'll discuss that in part 6 on the next one. See you then.